Can you hear me now? Okay, awesome. Am I still sharing? Yeah, cool. All right, so let's start again. So yeah, I am delighted to present Cultivating Mechanical Sympathy, Making Meaning with Ahumanoid Machines, a tentative title. I think I sent a different title to Eunice, sorry. So yes, thank you, Christina, Leah, and Floyd, for getting me this far. Could not have done it without you, and you all played an important part in each step to get me here. And thank you, Eunice, for coming all this way as well to get me that little bit further towards the end. So the presentation structure goes like this. We will have a definition of, like, an overall definition of mechanical sympathy, then cover a little bit of theory and method. Then I'll talk about how mechanical sympathy is cultivated through talking about my drone chi project. And also then we will then go to designing for mechanical sympathy. So talking about how to train your drone, the second project. And then finish off the presentation with opening up a potential design space for human-drone interaction. So let's start with the definition. So mechanical sympathy is the process of cultivating somaesthetic appreciation of a machine. This process entails fostering an awareness of your capabilities, limitations, and changing body in relation to a machine and vice versa. It also allows you to craft your own experiences with the machine and explore how that machine in turn shapes your preferences on how it should be. And then finally, through this process, you can reflect on and pursue the kinds of human-machine experiences that hold value and meaning to you. So, theory and method. This work rests mainly on two design principles. The first is Soma design, which aims to create applications where the interactions subtly support the user's attention inward towards their own body, enriching their sensitivity to enjoyment and appreciation. So basically, if you can develop your ability to reflect on what you're feeling, you're better able to appreciate and create your lived experience, live your life. Typical example is mediated body, where sound is mediated by touching another person, touching the facilitator, in fact. So it brings attention to these sensations and the situation, the playful dynamic situation that comes of it. It's a platform to explore. The other design discipline is product design engineering. So product design is the convergence point for engineering and design thinking. It's motivated by user-centeredness and time and cost. And there is no facilitators in the final product. So when you design something like an office chair, it needs to be intuitive for everybody who uses it. So we have this kind of divergent outcomes versus convergent outcomes, where one you explore with the designer and the other one is kind of provided by the designer. One is a focus on the body, the other one is a focus on the product. But they do come together under the umbrella of research through design. So in an active process of ideating, iterating, and critiquing potential solutions, design researchers continually reframe the problem as they attempt to make the right thing. And that right thing is a product that transforms the world from its current state to its preferred state. So for me, that's applications that allow reflective experiences like in Soma design, because I had come from an industry where I was designing like very good, lots of great things, but some things I didn't want to design, like this rubbish compactor, and other things that probably shouldn't exist. So now we go to the next part, which is cultivating mechanical sympathy, where we talk about drone chi and my lived experience with machines. So this is a video from when I first flew with a drone. It was a captivating and reflective experience where the body feels alive and present. It was as if every part of my body was like involved in keeping this drone in the air. was kind of like carrying a hot cup of coffee with a book under your arm, and you have to be careful about those footsteps because it makes the coffee splash, and then the threatening splashes of the coffee make you change how you move your body. And so, but except this was a little bit more meditative, and it needed to be cultivated, not just my body, but what the drone could do. So I took some Tai Chi lessons for a few months, and 3 aspects from those lessons I wanted to bring out in the design. And that was coordination of the limbs and balance and breathing and syncing up with the teachers and other students. So, and slow movement. So that kind of glacial articulation, like of all of your joints at once, is really lovely. And then the imagery was really powerful. So the names of the moves that were given in the lessons, like cloud hands or twin dragons rush out to sea, is like very evocative as well. So I pulled all this into as a design resource, and then again using Soma design, product design engineering, bouncing between the two. They kind of helped me reach the end stage or the final design. So that was Drone Chi, which was designed to facilitate meditative movement and reflection on that movement. It was primarily achieved by making the drone respond to small changes in the way that you move, breathe, and balance yourself. So you started by taking a flower drone from a vine. Then you put these hand pads on. Your hands kind of can curve around the pads. Thanks, Emma, for designing those pads. Then once the drone is in the air, you're instructed by the facilitator to move your hands around and explore what movements make the light bright. Then the drone starts moving in a circle, and if you maintain the brightness of that light by following it, but it will move in larger and larger circles, and the light turns pink. Eventually, control switches over to you, and you can move it anywhere around the room and explore that kind of nuanced movement relationship between the two. So we published a paper saying how relaxed and meditative everybody felt, and had some recommendations on what the designers should do to design more human-drone interactions that are like this. We got a Best Paper award, Best Paper honorable mention, sorry, which is also lovely. But that wasn't the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing was the diverse interpretations that we had, despite trying to push this Tai Chi angle. So I thought, what is the point of trying to look for consensus amongst this chaos? Why not let these interpretations drive the experience? They obviously came from each person's lived experience, from their own lives, just like my experience designing Drone Chi. So what I mean by that is, this is me on the left, just doing cloud hands with a non-responsive drone. It's just going in a circle, and I'm trying to sync up the rhythm. And then this is kind of all the nuance and sensitivity of Drone Chi. And so this process of moving from one to the other, this design process, reminded me a lot of my past lived experiences owning old cars and racing go-karts. So with the cars, there was always knowing this being aware of this changing relationship with the car, because it's an old car and stuff's always wearing out and you putting new parts in and whatever. And then with the kart, it was more of this in the moment sensing and acting, trying to find the limit of grip when you're going around a corner faster and faster and faster to see where the kart lets go and kicks out and kind of slides. So I tried to write down as much as I could remember about this process and use it as a design resource for the next project. So this is where we articulate. I had articulate mechanical sympathy in a little more detail through how to train your drone. So I came up with Rachel of 5 aspects of mechanical sympathy. It's grown to 5. Capabilities and limitations. So this is again, that example with the cart or with the drone, you can kind of repeated motions where you find the limit of what a drone can do, for example. Change. So change in me, change in the machine. I was doing Tai Chi lessons and I was getting better at balancing and better at moving slowly and smoothly. And that changed what I thought I could design with the drone. Also, the drones were wearing out and such. Difference. So this is like, for example, a drone that's having the propellers on the bottom, pushing it up. And that kind of looks like this compared to the drone propellers from the top, pulling it up. And that, I mean, that kind of looks the same, but it feels different. It has a different balance. And then a joint agency. So with all of these things in flux over time, you're going to get this very confusing question that you have to constantly ask yourself. Is like, do I change myself or do I change the machine? Should I change the drone to my preferences, or should I try and adapt to what the drone is doing to, or the cart is doing? And so through this investigation, you move towards your aesthetic preferences. You kind of begin, you might find something that you might, you might like if you try to adapt to the drone, or you might deepen your nuance, or you might deepen what you like to do by changing or by sticking to it and adapting to the drone. I think I got those two confused, but you get the idea. So this leads me to the actual project, how to train your drone. And it was important that it was conducted in a like a home, a domestic setting, amongst the rhythms of the everyday lives of the participants. It was a 4-week study with 3 housemates, and they had 3 sessions a week on the drones. They could kind of use them whenever they want. So this is how this one worked. You took a drone from the charger, which was sitting in the lounge room, and also 2 hand sensors, 1 for each hand. Then you put on the gloves and launch the drone. Okay, so the way it works is when the drone is spinning, it means it's not really paying attention to you. And so if you hold your hand still, then the drone will begin to slow down and further slowing until it kind of snaps to you. And then if you keep your hands in the relatively same position, the drone will follow your movements, and you can kind of like move it around the room. But you must maintain the position. So to look at that again, here I am holding your hands still. I moved a bit too much, so it started spinning again, slowing, and snap. So what's happening here is this red dot here is where my hands were when the drone snapped to me. And then the blue dot is where my hands are now. And the drone and the red dots will move to close this gap. I hope people in Zoom land can see that mouse cursor. But only if these blue dots stay within this sphere, which also moves with the drone. So here I am kind of moving the drone left and right and staying within that sphere. And then I purposefully rip my hands out and the drone will start spinning again. So this is when you have a choice. You can go back to those 2 points and recapture them, or you can train new ones and kind of build a body around the drone, because it's like a cumulative history of where you have handled it. Also, the drone has an eye and an eye color, and these correspond to different behaviors. So the clear drone had a low learn rate. So what I mean by that is like you hold your hands still for a very, very long time before a point appears. The maneuverability is high. So that means that sphere that I was talking about is like the size of a beach ball. You have a lot of play there. The launch height is very high, so that kind of changes how you approach it at the beginning of each session. And the spin rate is high. So what that means is like, that's how the drone communicates to you. If you think about something spinning really fast, slowing down quickly, it's easy to tell that it's slowing down, as opposed to something that's already spinning really slowly, and you can't really tell when it's going to stop, like a train arriving at the train station. So the other drones were like different variations of this. The blue drone was kind of halfway between all, had like medium in all categories. and the amber drone was the opposite. Very quick to train a point, but those spheres were very small, like just like a big baseball. Launch height was low and the spin rate was low, so very hard to tell when it's going to stop. So all of this stuff was designed to take each participant's unique characters and bodies and multiply them with the drone's unique characters and create all these divergent outcomes. All right, so the results. All the participants did hit 5 aspects of mechanical sympathy in some way, some more than others, as they forged their own relationship with the drone. We'll start with Justin. Justin said that, I found that when moving to the side, it's quite difficult. It's quite easy to move up and down because the drone doesn't get in the way. But when you're moving laterally, you're going to bump your hand into it. So Justin's drone had super low tolerance for inaccurate movement. So as a result, he realized that because it was harder to do this than this, he actually had to like kind of stick his foot out and like shift his weight to the left. Others didn't really need to do that. We're going to skip the audience participation today. But he still managed to express himself, like chase these pursuits. He's a bit of a larrikin, as we would say in Australia. I think maverick is the term in international English. So he's done this crazy thing where he shuffle his ankle because they out of that lost the drone. So he can only really move by shuffling his ankles, and this is one of his triumphs. Justin's points that accumulated around the drone were very dense on either side of the drone because he needed to have a few there to kind of at least get some sort of movement. So you can see them accumulate on either side there. But because all those points were packed in a tight space, you actually had a lot of like variance in how you could grab the drone, like here. There were a lot of options when I tried it. Okay, so Tom's movements were really planned out and premeditated. You can see here he's like kind of practicing what he's going to do before he starts, and he had this sequence of movements that he was building up. So the way it would start by he would like grab the drone, pull it up, and then push it out, pull it back in again. After which he would then take his hands and put them up here and push the drone down. So he was very much aware of the shape around his drone. But he also sought out change in comparison within that sequence. So here he is in a here he is after just doing this kind of movement where he creates an arc, and he usually is like this, but he's trying something a little bit different and trying to kind of move around within that. He was chasing what felt good, what flowed. Looking at the shape around his drone, you've got these like tower of points up the top where he grabbed it, and also as he did this sweeping motion, that created a kind of a trail of points around the drone there. And when I tried his drone, it was like I was riding a bike that was too big for me. It didn't work, and I couldn't find those points, but he could just like intuitively grab them. Then finally, Nora had a much more playful approach. She made like a ballet, and she said, for every session I was approached with having fun time and just playing. I think in that context it's good because you just have to respond to what is happening. And notice how she's okay with like letting go of the drone and just doing something really beauty on the side or some inside. I think because she had so much leeway, she had these kind of beach ball size bubbles around the joints, that she didn't really have to be so conscious of her balance or some sequence of movements like Justin and Tom. William had a cameo. Justin had a cameo. So she also kind of explored that joint agency. So she is like realizing that she doesn't have to pull her hands out and put them back in. She can actually just like move from one point to another, and the drone pops up to kind of compensate to where that point was. And so she's really surprised that this is happening here. And then like the next day, she was like, is that the next slide? No, it's here. The next day, she was like, okay, maybe I can just randomly like put my hands through the drone and make it like pop around. And she really enjoyed kind of destabilizing it in that way. She was very subversive in this way. So yeah, the points around her drone, very evenly spaced, because you couldn't really train points close together because of those bubbles, unless there was a bug. There were plenty. And also it's like evenly spaced, so you could kind of approach the drone from any angle, and so it made for a very robust kind of interaction with the drone. All right, so now we'll cover the design process of how to train a drone and how it opens up a design space, essentially. All right, so in the design process, I couldn't really find a way to minimize the implications that I placed on the participants. For example, if my hand does X, then the drone should do Y. I couldn't get out of that loop. Here I am using pose estimation to kind of figure out, to kind of track some value of my hand up and to a number, but it was really imposing some sort of preferred way of moving, which I was trying to get away from. So because the great thing about the Soma design, product design, engineering, hybrid working thing is I could just drop that problem and go work on the form of the drone. And I was very inspired by the work of Bill Gaver and Will Odom and Harvey Bewley, and how they leveraged ambiguity in their designs, specifically the blow nut, because it was like a radially symmetric robot, which I think, which is what the drone is. I was also interested in exploring this deep sea vibe, exploring the ambiguity that comes from all the crazy animals down there, and especially the radial symmetry down there that in the jellyfish easily maps onto a drone. And from some aesthetic perspective, I was thinking, what would it be like to move with these very alien creatures? What meaning-making opportunities are held within that? So I tried to kind of make these prop guards that you could shape, and that would kind of bring in another question, a question of style into, should I change myself or should I change the machine? Because as you change the shape, then it changes the balance of the drone, but also they all kind of look different as well. But all that stuff kept getting stuck into the propellers, and being the product design engineer that I am, it's like, okay, so we're going to stop this because it's getting too complicated. Let's try and do this virtually. At the same time, my daughter was an infant, and I also put the eyes on the drones and began to see them as my children also, but that's probably just sleep deprivation. And I was also reading some work from Barbara Tversky, even though it's not that book, who at the time explains babies start disconnected. They don't link what they see with what they do and what they feel. The connections are learned slowly over many months. Ultimately, what unites the senses foremost is action. That is, the output informs and integrates the input through a feedback loop. Unifying the senses depends on acting, doing and seeing and feeling, sensing the drone, sensing the feedback from the doing at the same time. It's a mouthful, this paragraph, but I kind of like how poorly worded it is, because it kind of explains how intertwined the sensing and acting is, and you can't really separate it. And so that's kind of where the idea to accumulate the points around the drone, start with zero, start with having to teach the drone, having you and the drone have to learn how to interact with each other and work for it, like how cultivating the Soma is having to be worked for. So in that sense, the drones are kind of like these animals whose way of being in the world, the way that they sense and act, is being shaped by the person interacting with them. Here, for example, Tom's drone cannot feel much above it except for vertically, but out wide it has a lot of sensitivity. Same with Justin's drone. It's like a very dense packing of kind of nerve endings either side of it. It's almost like in our lips, why our lips are so sensitive. And then Nora's drone is like kind of got these sensors everywhere, but they're not that densely packed. So they lack a resolution. And I should make the distinction here between the drone being able to sense its environment and the drone being able to sense the person, which I think now from here on in, I'm going to try and mix up, and it's going to be confusing for everybody, but that's why I'm here. All right, so here's where we bring in the first load of theory to open up the design space. First by introducing Jakob von Uexküll's concept of the Umwelt. Science writer Ed Young quotes von Uexküll's more poetic explanation of the Umwelt, where the body of an animal was compared to a house. He writes, each house, or he translates, each house has a number of windows which open into a garden, a light window, a sound window, an olfactory window, a taste window, and a great number of tactile windows. Depending on the manner in which these windows are built, the garden changes as it is seen from the house. By no means does it appear as a section of a larger world, rather it is the only world that belongs to the house, its Umwelt. The garden that appears to our eye is fundamentally different from that which presents itself to the inhabitants of the house. So basically every animal lives in its own Umwelt, complete with its own way of sensing the world. And Uexküll believes these worlds are unknowable and incomparable. In other words, we will always be in our own somas, in our own bodies. So this is why mechanical sympathy is not called mechanical empathy. Although participants might personify the drone and anthropomorphize it, the relationship developed is one through mutual affect, not mutual effect. It's something that happens. So if something happens in the drone, that will affect the person and vice versa. How either make meaning of that is based on their way of being in the world and their bodies and other factors. So as I said, I wanted to open up a design space. Mechanical sympathy is more of a tool for analysis, I feel, than idea generation. Although the Umwelt is ripe with descriptions of crazy animal sensing and hardware, sensing and actuation hardware, but there is a field that I think can bring a little bit more structure to this exploration, and that is evolutionary robotics. So this involves the design of robots, simulated or real world, to try and achieve some goal. Here is like distance in a given environment. Every time they try, they're quantitatively assessed on things like distance gained, energy used, smoothness, or whatever. The results are then sent to a genetic algorithm that mutates the length of the limbs and the placement of the sensors and when they fire. Then they move around experimentally to try and move their own bodies in the way that we would try and find an ecological niche. Like we can like throw our leg forward and land on our feet. That's because our body and our senses have evolved in this way. Does this sound familiar? I think so. What is interesting here is that evolution can also be viewed as a designer, albeit a blind one, but an extremely powerful one nonetheless. So in that it's coming up with these wild changes in the design to affect how the machine moves around and senses in strange ways. What's also interesting is that given the sheer complexity of this undertaking, the solution space can grow unfathomably large, which is why there's many different approaches to design. Agent design is typically performed in an ad hoc and intuitive way, and that often the path towards the final design is guided by a set of heuristic principles. So despite the scientific terminology, there are some epistemological alignment between what we're the two design and evolutionary robotics worlds. So the robot designer and the algorithm work together to solve the task environment. It's a little bit like the Soma designer and their materials, but now it's like this kind of more agential material. It's got more agency. So in this example, a single sphere evolved additional sensing and acting spheres to make limbs to push a block over 500 attempts. Eventually, it found this rhythm in its body, kind of like a caterpillar, to push the block. And so this reminds me of Kia Hook's work that advocates for transferring qualities from horseback riding to interaction design. But she says in this paper, it's not the ability to fulfill a task, but the experience of the corporeality of doing so that matters here. So in the thesis, I kind of try to line up a lot of the fundamental, like the earlier principles of new robotics, as it's called, with mechanical sympathy and other aspects of Soma design, with the hope of kind of trying to ask the question, like, what if we stopped evaluating on a purely quantitative basis these machines and started moving with them, shaping how they sense or act in the world based on our aesthetic appreciation of that machine? Could we end up with like a design space full of ever-changing familiar machines that are evolving something strange, which we can then kind of investigate and appreciate? A Soma in the loop. Did that go? And you can just believe me that it says a Soma in the loop. Ah, there it is. A Soma in the loop. Okay, so that's the end of the chat talk. I have some thanks. I could not have done this on my own, obviously. Lots of people helping me. I have excellent supervisors, one adopted supervisor, mind-bending discussions and advice from people, space and equipment. I forgot to include Dee. Sorry, thank you, Dee, for also space and equipment. Lots of amazing collaborators who helped me, and then general technical support. I didn't even like drones when I started this PhD, let alone know how to fly them. So thank you to all these people to help me do that. That's it. You can reach me at Cafe Jarjo. Cool.
Yeah. You can also see the painting.
Yes, super.
All right. First of all, sound check. Can you hear me from down in the corner there if I speak like this? It's okay. Because when you sit like this, you tend to kind of huddle up and talk to Joe, and then I worry that I won't reach out, but that's okay. It's a pretty small room and all. Okay, thank you so much for having me again. I was here only a couple of months ago, talking to Charles, and now I'm here talking to Joe. Is it Joe or Joseph?
Joe is good.
Joe is okay.
Yeah.
Good. And well, yeah, both of these are just huge learning opportunities for me, and I'm very thankful that I have chance to have this kind of discussion, and hopefully perhaps even contribute a couple of small things that could, before it's all set in stone.
Yep.
So yeah, thank you, Kia. Thank you, Joe, for having me. Managing expectations is going to be important here. Kia seems to think that I can do some magical deconstruction and improvement kind of thing on the fly, and obviously I can't. It's all going to be down to you. What I might be able to do, though, is to talk about a couple of things that came to mind when reading your draft and when watching your very, very nice and engaging presentation here today. And I'm going to turn them into questions, and I want you to speculate on some of them and, you know, see where it goes. But I cannot promise any more than that. I hope that's okay. So I have a handful of thoughts that I would like to talk to you about. The first one, I guess, needs to be the concept of mechanical sympathy, because it is, even in your title, it's clearly an important thing for you, an attempt to capture and synthesize what you have observed and experienced. And I suppose my first question is really, how do you see mechanical sympathy in your case in relation to the general feeling of, I guess, care that people experience with machines and with tools and with material objects in general? There are a couple of things that I think are recurrent. One is that the more you know about a thing or a machine or a practice, the more you're inclined to care for it, to engage with it, to essentially experience sympathy with it. And there are, to me anyway, clear connections to the practices of making and repairing and repurposing in a more traditional craft kind of context. So what's special about mechanical sympathy?
It's I think the main thing that it's helped me do is realize its importance to me. Because it was only until a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, that it was just a stream of first-person diary entries and recollections. So that helps me. So that's kind of like a more functional answer, because it's the more I kind of synthesize it, the more I realize that it's not that special in a way, because it starts to rhyme with all of these concepts that are in existing literature, like in the way we appreciate things in Soma design, like change in interest and estrangement and things like that. So there's that.
Skilled appreciation is a really good way of putting it, which would also resonate with what we know from like other fields. Yeah, that's very helpful. For those of you who haven't had a chance to read Joe's draft, it has a very strong flavor of a journey to it. It's very much a narrative, a story of a researcher discovering, exploring, understanding, and then working that into the next step. So it's almost a paradigmatic example of what you would call a design-driven exploration, I guess, which is, of course, very much in the spirit of what we mean by research through design. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense, basically. And I'm wondering if you feel the responsibility to take this conceptual construct that you have arrived at from your own process and relating it more clearly to what has been said and thought and articulated already in other discourses, I guess.
So you mean to say, like, do I see the importance in?
Yeah. Is that part of your job before you can wrap this up? To discuss how mechanical sympathy is similar or different to other similar notions.
Yeah.
Is this going to be the kind of criticism that you haven't done your homework properly?
Yeah.
You know, you missed a lot of related work, blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing.
I think that is, I think from an academic sense, it's important as long as it's framed that in a way that I think that shows that that I arrived there through first person experience.
Yeah.
and not reading like, oh, that person had that experience, I'm going to go and try and have the same one. Because I certainly don't want this to come across as like, I've discovered this new thing and I've coined this term, and like people should go and now have their own versions of it all. Because, you know, I see it as a product of passion and interest and engaging.
Sure.
So I don't, aside from like giving the academic process due course of like relating it to something else, I'm not sure what people stand to gain from understanding that it's the same. Because if the message is that like, you need to engage, if the central message of the thesis is you need to engage, or you don't need to, but like technology can be designed to facilitate your engagement with a material or with the technology, then whether or not it came from a car or whether or not it came from dancing with a sword or whatever, it doesn't actually matter. Like the nuances can be found in between that person and the world and the objects in that world, not necessarily the relations between the concepts.
Yes. However, you are taking it into the world of concepts by calling yourself a PhD student and defending a PhD.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes back to you anyway.
Yeah.
And you asked what people stand to gain. I think they stand to gain two things. One is the more, prudential, formalistic kind of gain, that they can be satisfied that this guy has done proper reading. If he wants to call himself a PhD, he has to be well read, that kind of thing. But the more important thing, I think, is by pointing out those connections, you help people think. You help people understand what you're saying by showing them that what I'm saying is also relating to this that you may be more familiar with.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's, in my mind, that's one of the reasons why we do all this silly dancing in academia. It's just to help people grasp a space of concepts and thoughts and ideas and theories that is much, much larger than a single person could possibly have in their heads. So if you find those kinds of connections, you will help other people in your situation by pointing them out. I feel. So maybe that's something that we need to put on the list, to think a little more about how mechanical sympathy can and should be grounded in other conceptual constructs. And one of the things that I noticed when doing this exercise for myself is your sense of mechanical sympathy does not really seem to have ethical aspects to it. It doesn't really seem to be about caring. At the same time, I'm going to come back to this. At the same time, your empirical data, your videos, seem to have a very, very strong undertone of caring. Your presentation, even when you choose a baby metaphor to talk about human-machine relations, there is so much care in there. But yet it doesn't show up in your 5 aspects of mechanical sympathy. That kind of struck me as a question I wanted to ask.
I don't know. I think it's like, as I certainly do care for these objects, like I said in the presentation, I started to see the drones as my kids, right? But perhaps I've been swept up by the whole notion of actionable outcomes for a PhD, and really being able to, I think that's kind of wrung out all of the love and care from from the interactions with the materials in a way,
Yeah.
because it's kind of, yeah, the
Which is
core of it is quite practical.
Yeah. I could argue, I guess, that adding an aspect of care to your existing proposed definition of mechanical sympathy wouldn't hurt a bit.
Yeah.
But I think it would make the umbrella slightly more waterproof, slightly more complete, slightly more inclusive.
Yeah.
Because at least to me, there is this strong impression of care running through much of what you present and what you have done. So I'm slightly surprised to not see it in your title concept, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to ground in other literatures if you want. I mean, there are ideas from other authors pointing to how your care for a machine grows as you learn more about the machine and as you start engaging with it and as you start unpacking it and tinkering with it. And you even have it yourself in the kappa where you talk about your old car.
Yes.
It felt to me like you had everything except the reference to what's this guy's name again? I blanked on the name, but I'll give you the name afterwards. It's almost like you're referring to his book, basically. Yeah. So that was my first.
Not Shopcraft is Soulcraft or something like this. Did you read that?
Yeah. Yeah. Crawford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew B. Crawford. Okay.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the one.
Okay.
That's
So
the one.
I did read that.
You did read that?
Yes.
Right.
Quite closely, actually.
I thought you might.
Yeah.
I thought you might.
But I was kind of scared away by his
unscientific demeanor.
Well, no, like, because I'm certainly not a scientist, that's for sure.
It's a very readable book. If for those of you who haven't seen it, and that usually means it's not science, but in this case it is.
Yes.
It's one of the most, I think, powerful and elegant understandings of craft, certain aspects of craft that you can find out there. It's just that he wrote it for people to be able to read and enjoy and relate, and not necessarily to publish in academic conferences, because he's not an academic. He just seems to be
he was a political scientist and
a
then
multi-genius kind of person.
Yeah. I mean, for context, he was a political scientist and then he quit his job to start a motorcycle.
That's it. That's it. So
garage.
His domain is motorcycle repair and motorcycle driving, and the bodily experience of understanding a machine quite deeply by engaging somatically with it. So, I mean, his accounts are almost word for word relatable to your first person experiences also. So I definitely suggest you find a way to work him in there, because it would just resonate so much.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Side note, maybe, but no, maybe not side note. Maybe I'll just write Crawford. Okay. Thank you. That was really helpful. I'd like to move on a little bit. I'd like to talk about the kinds of human-machine relations that you concentrate on. I would characterize them as quite asymmetrical, in the sense that the machines you're working with are small, they're cute, they are not very capable. You can train them to perform simple tricks, but they don't really surprise you in any deeper sense. And they are clearly subordinate to the people interacting with them. And like I said, there is a very strong feeling of protecting and caring. Also, if you look at the how to train your drone videos. Just look at the postures, the movements, the facial expressions of the participants. And also, I noticed that these people, the users, maybe we should call them participants, seem completely focused on what they do. At least while on camera. They seem completely focused on what they do. It's clearly a full attention kind of situation. Do you think that's a fair characterization, or am I simplifying too much?
I think it's fair, except for the potentially the use of the word subordinate.
Aha. Okay, so not subordinate.
Like, I wonder why you use the word subordinate.
Yeah, I'll come back to that, I think, because it has to do with how I think about mutual agency and how you think about mutual agency. But my first question in this general area is, do you think that your approach and your work would extend to other kinds of human-machine relations? I have a bunch of examples here. First example is, what if the machines were larger, more powerful, more complex?
Yeah. So I have thought about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And because I think I'll start by answering this question with the method of Soma design, where you work with the material, in a sense, the character, right? The phenomena that I was working with was that captivating potential of the drone, and what could come from that. So it really does grab your attention and hold it, as I said with the cup of tea example. So applying the learnings of this outside of that can get sketchy, I think, but not completely, because we still need to have bodily engagements with other conscious beings, but with other humans and other animals, and your cat might be roaming around the house all day, but you still need to come home and cuddle it and understand what it's doing, like to understand whether or not it's had a good day or it's getting sick or something like that. So there still needs to be that contact, that care on that level, that tacit level. And so, but that gets a bit weird when it's like turns into a robot. That like, what do you do to, what do you do to understand a robot that has quite a lot of autonomy? And you need to understand whether or not it's being a good employee or being a good collaborator. Part of that is it's not just evaluating its task performance. And so there needs to be some kind of other engagement, which this work could speak to in some ways. And I'm trying not to use this stupid example that I keep thinking of, but I can't think of anything else. It's like in the movies when two enemies like try to understand each other, they dance with each other and they like get to know each other on this other level.
What movie?
No, it's like a trope. It's almost like a trope. I can't pinpoint a specific movie, but like people like
I've never seen that.
Yeah, like
I guess I don't see the right kind of movies.
Maybe I'm seeing the wrong kind of movies. I'm not sure, but like it's
go ahead.
Yeah, it's like yeah, now it's a really relaxed chat because I'm just shooting from the hip.
That's fine.
But what I'm trying to say is, like, let's say you're negotiating with somebody, and negotiations are very, like, game theory based. You're careful what you say, but then sometimes there is an element of that can be kind of sideswiped, or more information is understood about that negotiation by understanding the person as a person and engaging with them on a different level other than something quite objective. And then I propose this, now you propose that, here are my comments. And so that's where I see this work potentially speaking to understanding more autonomous
Yeah,
agents.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to stop talking.
No, this is super interesting. So what you seem to be suggesting is that even in a larger, more complex, more all-encompassing kind of context of human-machine interactions or relations, sorry, even in those kinds of much larger contexts, there will still be a need or an opportunity for us, at least, to deepen our relationships with those machines, possibly using ways that are inspired by your work here.
Possibly.
Yeah. So stretching that really, really, really far.
Yeah.
Even in factory automation kind of situation with large industrial robots manufacturing something or the other, it would make sense to put the notion of mechanical sympathy on the table and possibly create work practices or redesigning the robots and the environment to foster also some degree of mechanical sympathy between, let's say, the factory operators and the manufacturing technology in that factory.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Ish. Yeah. And this specific example, I mean, yeah. Okay. So going on from that example is like, if you look at, like, when I used to be at a consultancy, we had a workshop downstairs in the bunker in the basement, and someone managed that. And that guy also managed all the computers in the office. And because he was just on the tools all the time, if I had some sort of problem, like, he would come and say, yeah, that monitor's been playing up. You need to use a different source. Or like, you can't use this tool. I need to get it sharp and I'll send it off next week. And so, like, they have this mechanically sympathetic relationship to everything that's happening in the office. And they are like, I don't need to have that relationship with every tool in the office. I just need to go down and use a hammer or something. And so I think that can be propagated to more autonomous machines through this work. Yeah.
Can I pick up on that? I've been thinking about that quite a bit. I like to call it the janitorial stance.
Yeah.
The stance of knowing enough about how something works to care for it and make sure it works properly and to take responsibility for it and all those things. And how it's usually delegated in an organization to a specific function or a specific person who is supposed to just prepare the setting for the others who don't need to have that level of appreciation, skill, caring. And I've been thinking that if more of us could be more like janitors towards our technology or our machines, as it were, I think the situation would be generally better in that organization. And that could be manufacturing, but it could also be office work, could also be leisure time situations. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are limits, though, that we sometimes you just don't need. Like, I still think I wrote in the thesis that I don't have a problem with user-centered design. I just have a problem with its dominance. And that with that comes an expectation that everything should work all the time. And so we have the disproportionate. Yeah, this is disproportionate. It's unbalanced in that way. So that's why I say there's a limit to that. And also, it brings more joy. It brings more jobs and more opportunities to have that kind of joy in the workplace. So that's kind of a reason to have that for, like, that's why it's like something that you want to engage in. You want to apply for the job as a janitor because you do enjoy engaging with machines in this way.
There is also another discourse that you could easily connect it to if you wanted to make the argument that this is a good thing. And that is the whole discourse of consumerism versus repair and repurposing,
Yeah.
right? I don't think it's a coincidence that you start your first chapter with a story about repurposing rubbish.
Yep.
Again, for those of you who haven't read it, in parts of Australia, apparently it's a tradition to put your big rubbish out in front of the house every year during spring cleaning. And it doesn't say explicitly, but I get the sense that it's meant to be given away. It's for everyone to take.
Yeah, it was. And then people started cutting themselves on the rubbish
Right,
pile. So
right,
you're technically
right,
not
right.
allowed to touch them anymore. But
No,
still
but there
do.
used to be this kind of scavenging that
Yeah.
was sanctioned,
Yes.
kind of. So it was okay for you to go through suburbia and
Of
pick up
course.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It was like best time of the year.
Right. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you start from that point in your journey, the way it's been told here in the Kappa, because it makes so much sense to me to connect that further down the road to this whole notion of mechanical sympathy. And yeah,
That's good.
I'm saying obvious things here.
Thank you.
Nice. Like this. I think we covered pretty much all of those in that exchange. I also had a note saying this question may be very significant for your attempt to try and connect this work to new robotics. But I'm sure you've seen that yourself also.
What's that? The repair section.
No, the whole notion of how you think about human-machine relations and what we have been touching on now, and the value potentially of mechanical sympathy extending beyond small, cute, cuddly, incapable drones to more like real-life situations. I thought that could be really useful for you in your attempt in the final chapter. To try and connect your work to what you call new robotics. Or am I just making that up?
No, I
Does it make sense?
yeah. Yeah, maybe I didn't imply that. It's just, I think I didn't imply that strong enough. Like I think there needs to be more people. Like it's almost like a new version of the janitor role to be that person who grows the agent in this environment and the social context in which it should operate.
Yeah.
And so there is a very human element in between the machine and whoever needs to use the machine. And because like I love how in evolutionary robotics, the context, like the task environment is so central to how the machine evolves, which means that which implies that there is not like some central machine creating some model that's going to be applied to every single scenario, but rather there could be an element of that. But in the end, like the end effector in a way is the actual robot that is grown in the context in which it should operate. Am I making sense there?
You are.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to multitask here, which
Okay,
is obviously not going to work.
I can do a Control F search in the thesis. What are you looking for?
No. What I was looking for was in the current version of the Kappa, you have chosen to try and make this connection by summarizing a number of principles in a table and looking for the corresponding
yes, right.
elements.
I understand what you're saying now.
Soma
Yeah,
design.
right.
And I was thinking that may not be the most effective way of making that point.
Yeah, okay.
Instead, I could imagine a piece of free text talking about how mechanical sympathy can inform
Okay.
other kinds of practices than classic Soma design situations.
Right. Yes, okay.
So it's the same goal, but maybe a different way to get there that might be more approachable for a reader. Because what you're setting out to do in this table is kind of demanding, actually.
Yeah, no, if
it's going to work for a reader.
Yeah, it's a big one.
There may be easier ways.
Yeah.
of getting the same point across. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's funny. That kind of speaks back to the grounding point at the beginning of this discussion, because I figured that like, oh, if this is going to hold any water, if this is going to be legitimate, then I have to like speak on that level before we can move forward.
Yeah.
Rather than speaking on the level of first person experience. It's like a switch between, it's like the start, I want to ground mechanical sympathy in first person experience and ignore the literature. And at the end, I'm like obsessed with literature and ignore the first experience.
It's perfectly natural.
Yeah.
It's perfectly natural. It's another aspect of this being a journey.
Yeah.
It starts from something. And in your case, it starts from first person experiences, from exploring by physical experimentation. And then you gradually realize in this environment, in this context, I need to also articulate my concepts. And I need to relate them to other people's concepts. And that's just part of becoming a PhD, if you will. For someone like you coming from a design and practice and very hands-on kind of upbringing, your journey has to be a journey into the world of words and concepts and articulation, basically.
Yes.
And I think you have done that.
Okay, cool.
So
thank you.
I don't think there is a fundamental problem.
Right.
And just for completeness, I think what you have is clearly good enough in terms of being contributions to our field. What I'm doing now is just dancing around the edges of where it could also go.
Okay, cool.
You kind of opened up for it by having this chapter on trying to relate your work to new robotics. You chose a way to do it that I felt was slightly clumsy. And I think there may be other ways that are more direct and more comfortable, while still accomplishing the same goal. That's what I was trying to say.
But that prompts a question for me then.
Sure.
You said it's clumsy and it could be more comfortable, but comfortable for who? Like comfortable for new roboticists or comfortable for Soma designers? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't think that you have to take on the task of mediating this all the way into a different research field. If that were the case, you would have published in robotics conferences and not HCI conferences.
Yeah.
But for the HCI audience, which is the audience you are writing for,
yes.
it would be good if you could also try and point in some directions.
Yeah.
I'll come back to this. No, maybe we do it now. Maybe, we do it now. That's more logical. So the reason I'm bringing up this whole part is that Soma design, as I see it, has a pretty strong core, constituted by the theoretical framework to some extent, the specific methods to some extent, but also constituted by the seminal examples. And I think it's kind of telling that the original canonical Soma design examples are more about tools for Soma designers to do their Soma design more deeply, more effectively. It's very introvert in a way. I'm looking at Kia now because this is really not your story. It's more like Kia's story. The Soma mat, the breathing lamp, these kinds of things, they are very, very much focused on becoming Soma designers and the formative stages of a new practice, I guess. And I had a question here saying, how far outside that world would you say that your work has?
Damn, I thought you were going to answer that question for me.
We are, in a way, Joe, we are answering that question by talking about things like, what could the notion of mechanical sympathy mean for robotics and
Yeah.
factory automation and other kinds of situations. So we are actually answering it together right now.
So the question is, how far can it go? How far away from the canonical examples? does this
Yeah,
kind of switch?
yeah.
Um,
It's a super hard question.
I think the 2 points there. The 2 points that come to mind there is one, the perspective of what the designer is actually working with. At the core of the Soma design program, it's very much a material. You talk about material qualities and knowing what the material can do, and so it's very much on this inert end of the spectrum.
Yes.
But then on this end, like now with this work, I think it's closer to designing an agent, something with agency.
Yes.
And but the great thing
is also for the rest of you, this is also something that Joe does identify in his kappa. It's one of the themes that he clearly points out. So it's not just something he's making up now.
Which would be cool.
It was there. It was there.
You know what I thought of?
Also last
yeah. You know what I've been thinking of the last 2 years?
So I agree. That's a really nice way of arguing how your work is a contribution beyond the seminal Soma design canon, if you will. I definitely support that line of argumentation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's the right size also in terms of expansion and conceptual complexity and so on.
Yeah,
I agree.
Okay, that's good. The other thing that maybe you're going to touch on this later, but the other thing that comes to mind is like that when I was first understanding the Soma design program or getting to know it, I never understood, or I always was interested by the fact that the designer almost does the same thing as the user, and in a sense that you are asked to engage with the material. Like you have to engage with the material as a designer to create the Soma mat so that people can turn inwards and reflect on the different sides of their body. Is my right shoulder higher than my left? And then when you give the mat to somebody, that you get them to lie down on it, and then they're doing the exact same thing.
Exactly.
So
that's what I meant with introvert.
Yeah, right. But then what's the difference between the designer and the user? I think that maybe the whole moving from a material to an agent kind of brings that into more clarity, or makes that a more not clarity, but blurs that definition even further, or blurs that distinction even further.
Yeah, there is. I mean, as soon as you go to a phenomenological first person kind of stance, there is always going to be the agency of each individual user and what they make of the thing you put in front of them. But there is also the priori role of setting the stage for that person to make their own meaning. So it's not the same as doing co-design or doing co-creative work in the normal sense, but it's clearly a case of setting a stage, proposing a space for action and experience and meaning making, rather than determining what you're supposed to feel, what meaning you're supposed to make.
Yes.
So it's like this old interaction design metaphor of you're more like a director in reality. You're setting the stage, you're getting the props, and you're providing the central plot line. But then the actors come on stage and they do what they will with those preconditions. So that this is, I'm sure it's out of fashion now, but it used to be clever to talk about interaction design as directing improv theater.
Right. Yeah.
Basically. And in some ways, I feel that the Soma designer is maybe a little bit like an improv director in that sense. Yeah, it also connects to this whole notion of making tools and making toolkits and so on for other people to use in different ways. You provide certain openings, but you take away other openings, you know. This might be a way for you perhaps to clarify what your contributions are at the end of the day by looking at what is Soma design, what is the Soma design program, and how am I moving it, contributing to moving it,
yeah,
or shifting it or drifting it with my work.
Mm.
And I think probably the strongest theme there could be the material to agency kind of theme, because it's very, very clear. Yeah, that should work in terms of internal relevance. I had one more thing, and then I just wanted to open up because I guess other people have questions and comments as well. Going back to agency. And here, I think, is the reason I used the word subordinate before that you took offense to.
Offense, yes.
No,
of the highest nature.
Yeah, I know. I could see a tear in your eye there. No, but I think the reason I used subordinate was when I watched the videos from How to Train Your Drone. My impression, no systematic analysis, just watching the videos and thinking about what do I see. What I saw was that all the participants were very, very focused on controlling the drone.
Yes.
That seemed to be the reason they thought they were there, basically. To try and control this drone and to make it do things. So the interaction for me seemed to be not so much about giving up control or relinquishing control, but rather gaining control over something that was slightly difficult to control. I could see it in their faces. They were like concerned with how can I get it to blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And then there was this satisfaction and this relief when they were able to do blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, there we go. Look what I can do now with the drone. So to me, it felt like an exercise in controlling something that was slightly difficult.
Yes.
Or slightly more difficult to control. Any thoughts on that interpretation?
Yeah, I think that speaks to well, I never thought of that, never used that metaphor of the director, but we can use it here because I just called it a platform. I guess that's like a stage.
Same thing.
But the fact that you move your hands into a point and then the drone is looking at you, it's very binary. And I think that propagates that kind of, I'm controlling it, I'm not controlling it.
Yeah.
And it took Nora, who's like subversive character, to kind of break that and resist it. And that means, and that's like not the first time I've read about this, like other people doing drone work, like Mafalda has talked about drones being in an on-off state, and there's no in-between states. And so I think that I tried to break that a little bit by having the drones in the lounge room.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so it's like either they're flying or they're not, like this one.
No, I see.
It's like
I see.
that. So
that's a contribution itself then, to just add to some points between those extremes.
Yeah,
I wasn't aware that was kind of how this was thought about, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I did enough, like in hindsight, to really break that spell.
No,
I put it in the lounge room to it's like there all the time, and maybe because they also had to charge the drones themselves, so they had the kind of commitment to care in a way that they had to make sure it was turned off at nighttime, didn't want them charging overnight because of ethics, and that's ethical approval and stuff like that. So they had a commitment there, and that constituted some in between states, but it was not even close to what, you know, could be the case where they perhaps they spend 4 weeks at 50% power and they can't even fly, like a bird trying to leave the nest. Like there's so much gradient in between that you can play with, and we need the tools to be able to do that.
But what we could argue then that you are doing is at least to kind of open up that space, drawing our attention to the fact that there are interesting states between the on and the off. And that, I think, may be a contribution in itself. It certainly sounds like it. But then to me, the logical extension would be to think about situations where the partially autonomous agent is more peripheral. It's more just like part of a larger whole, something happening in the corner of your eye that you sometimes you engage with it for a little while, other times it just does its thing. And that would perhaps open up new interesting situations where you don't have to have this deadly hypnotic trance focus on a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
What could be in that space? Do you see any situations, any
I've seen
applications, any uses that are more of a peripheral nature that could be interesting?
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole field of ambient technology and slow technology that we can draw inspiration from. I've also seen drones. Actually, very recently, someone sent me a link. Nadia sent me a link about drones living on street lamps and then coming to meet you, and they all have different behaviors like mine, kind of more aggressive flying patterns and loopy flying patterns and that sort of stuff. But they're not yours. They just come and like see you, like you're Snow White going through the forest or something. So there's a lot there. There's certainly a lot there. I think technically it's going to be really hard because everything flew in this video, and I probably should have said this, but like, God, they just never fly. And so that's where like the whole janitor thing comes into it, where it's like maybe someone lives next to these 5 lampposts and makes sure these drones fly. So there's that element to it as well.
Yeah, but that would be like bringing the janitor back to the invisible infrastructure support for other people to do their important things.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a mistake.
A mistake?
Yeah, I think you'd rather want to promote the janitor. If you see what I mean.
As
I
in
think
not
that,
second or not.
No, exactly. I think the janitorial work is actually first order work.
Right.
If you want to talk about mechanical sympathy, and if you want to talk about caring for the machines and appreciating the machines and learning about the machines and so on. I think part of that move will have to be to elevate what we normally think about as menial, janitorial, just fix it. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, yeah, just nitpicking here, but I think that's important. Probably a bad idea to use the word janitor like I'm doing, because it has all those connotations.
Right.
I'm going to start talking about mechanical sympathy instead.
Okay.
It's much more, it's much more neutral in that regard. And then I can say janitors are the historical example of how this manifests itself.
Right.
But I don't have to use that word. Thanks.
You're welcome.
How about you guys? I've been going on for ages now. Do you have any comments or questions or
so we have
reflections?
A long essay question from Marie-Louise. Do you want to post a question yourself, Marie-Louise?
I think she's left. Oh no, she's here. Yeah.
I don't know.
Hello. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Joe, for this beautiful work. I absolutely love your design work, and just the presentation was so nicely delivered. So I just wrote some reflections in the chat, with including 2 questions. And the first question is, what might be the unintended consequences of this mechanical symphony that you pose, or the possible misuses? Because I see a lot of, I mean, these autonomous technologies are also used for warfare and for instance, drilling, underwater drilling for natural resources. So that would be like the first question, difficult one. And then the second one was that I see your aesthetics inspiration is from nature and biomimicry. But what are you giving back to nature?
Hard. And not going easy on me. Okay. So the unintended consequences, yeah, you could certainly kind of, I mean, any kind of autonomous technology, you can kind of hack and to do some nefarious bidding. But I mean, I would argue that it's not that much different than somebody hacking together something that is going to cause a lot of harm. Like you still, the people who, like you would still need to know a lot about the material in order to do some really bad work. I think, so it's like, are you asking though, however, that if there's any difference between, like if it changes anything by introducing the idea of training the technology in the sense that I spoke about today? Is that the difference here?
I think if you look, like some of the values that you present with the mechanical sympathy is maybe introducing different kinds of values than those normally in autonomous technologies, like control or violence or domination. So I do see a different perspective in your concept, which is maybe more with the care or the mutual shaping. But I just might wonder how it, like, what's the stretch there from your concept to how it could be misappropriated or provide maybe an alternative to some of these more darker autonomous technology paradigms.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's, I think it would be easily misused. But having said that, maybe now I'm shooting from the hip again, but maybe, you know, if you are going to commit some crime with these drones, it's like anything to do with these drones, and especially now amplified by how to train your drone, like by the mechanical sympathy, it's going to take a lot of work. And so if you're committed to like if you're committed to shooting a gun, the commitment, like that post-phenomenological example, it's like there isn't a big step to, like, there aren't many checks in between. I'm gonna go kill someone with this drone. Oh, first I have to train it for 3 months. But between that versus I'm going to buy a gun and shoot somebody, which can take sometimes 3 hours. And so it really requires a commitment. It requires a commitment to do bad, and it requires a commitment to do good. So perhaps that's some hurdles there. But I mean, that's the same. It's like if you're going to use a 3D printed gun, you have to go and print the gun. And so the whole time, like through that 9-hour print, you have to think about shooting someone and killing someone, and then be okay with that. I mean, so that maybe there's something there. And then the second thing is, what is it giving back? So I think that one of the concepts that I didn't cover in the presentation was called computational morphology, which means that, like, I don't need to control every single aspect of my body. Sometimes gravity and the way my muscles are organized allows my leg to just land in the right spot. So that in robotics, it uses the same thing. And so I think that there is a potential here, which I didn't speak to a lot because I feel like it's out of my expertise. But then if you're making these robots fit for purpose in each environment, then perhaps we don't need to be, using a lot of compute in order to create create functional or meaningful interactions in the context and the people that is using it. So it might not work if you just turn it 3 degrees to the left and ask it to do something else, but it's very cheap design is what they call, which could mean that, which I guess could mean that we don't rely on like infinite compute by some central computer to control our robotics warehouse or something like this. Yeah, that came out way worse than I thought, but yeah, that's the answer to that question. So like there is I think there's an advantage to working within the context, and that is a saving of resources, because also, actually that reminds me, mechanical sympathy is also used in software engineering. So it's used by people who can program from a hardware level, like almost machine language, all the way to a software level, and they understand that you can actually use way less resources if you're not just like importing massive software packages that you have no idea how resource intensive they are to do the job, when actually you could get it done with a microprocessor that uses a very little power. So they ask software engineers to have mechanical sympathy, as in not make the computer use 500 watts or like 5 kilowatts for 5 hours to do a task that they could have done with much less power, because they don't understand how much the software is asking the machine to compute. So that's how I can see it giving back.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions in the room, or comments or reflections, or? Yeah, go for it.
I'm curious about this concept of knowing more about a technology, meaning you care for it more. And maybe I've oversimplified that, but I think I wonder if there's actually, if that's not quite as linear of a thing as all that. Like, I find that often in terms of technology, knowing more about a technology can often make you care less about it. Notably, I'm thinking about AI, for example. Like, the more you know about AI, the less you think it's a big deal. And the people that freaking out about AI or think it's going to save the world often actually don't know really how it's working.
Yeah.
When you know a ton about it, you kind of think a bit more nuanced about it. You think, yeah, in certain situations or certain practices, it might work very well. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't quite knock on the care as much, but I do feel like there's sort of a
thing there. Yeah, I was going to say that I agree entirely with what you say, except that maybe we are using the word care in a couple of different meanings here.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe I'm mapping that on in a wrong way, but I think
I definitely see your point.
Well, and I guess what I was sort of leaning towards in a kind of unformed sort of way was like, in a way where I see mechanical sympathy as being a powerful concept, is that it kind of offers a different road towards that.
Yep.
Oh, you need to know the technical stuff, because the people controlling those drones don't necessarily know exactly how it's all working, and yet you're still able to develop this kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And that kind of points more towards almost like musical instrument design. Is what I see it also kind of overlapping a lot with, like, musicians don't necessarily know all exactly how a musical instrument works yet. They develop a relationship with it. So yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't mean to disagree with your nature.
No, it's great.
But like, I think
it's great. It's definitely more complicated. I mean, for anything more advanced than a hammer, there are levels of what it means to say that you understand and know the technology. Yeah.
So I'm afraid I didn't pay more of a comment than a question.
No,
Yeah,
it's a great comment. It needs to go in there somewhere if you want to take this route.
So before you go, Mafalda wants to ask, so you need to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so
Hello.
much for this discussion, and thank you for bringing up these matters of care. And you know where I'm coming from when I'm asking you this. So as far as I know, you were also one of the participants in the how to train your drone.
Mhm.
study. I see you didn't entirely present that. So I wonder, why do you distance yourself still from this study? But my actual question is, would you still care to have these drones in your home? So after all of these years working with them and working on this mechanical sympathy, would you care to have these mechanical sympathetic machines in your home?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question, Mafalda. The answer to the first one is that I didn't have time to include the section of the study where everybody swapped drones for a few sessions, and we commented about differences and how the different drones enhanced your appreciation for what you had kind of built. So I didn't mean to come across that I'm distancing myself. And then the second question, will I have, yeah, so I think for me, every time I commit to building something myself versus buying it, I had taken into consideration whether I can continue to support it breaking all the time. And so I think if I didn't have a job, I would probably make and fix everything in my house, but then I wouldn't have time to work to buy things to make and fix. So I have to buy some things, and that kills me. I hate it. But so some things I have to make, or some things I have to buy. So that's kind of where that kind of stems. And also just like, who am I impacting by committing to who am I impacting by committing to, like, okay, the flag broke on our pram, right? I wanted to replace it with an aerial, but I haven't. It's been so long and we don't have a flag, and that's impacting the safety of my daughter. So I'm like, God, I shouldn't just be such an anti-capitalist freak and just buy a flag. So these are the implications of wanting to have that lovely feeling of making something new and understanding what kind of aerials you can buy off RS components versus keeping your daughter safe. So yeah, this is what goes through my mind. I hope that answers your question.
So before we go to Michal, Andreas wanted to.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the population, because you put it as a mimicking with a humanoid.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, how did you come about selecting that word?
Yeah, cool question. Thank you. So I was thinking, so humanoid is in like human likeness, non-human likeness. A lot of opportunities to make interacting with a humanoid robot, even something with a face, brings with it implications of emotion and posture and things like that. So by delineating the thesis to non-humanoid or ahumanoid, I just say that there's a lot of that opens up the space a little bit more for the person to create their own meaning. And then,
but it's a really important question from the point of view of wrapping up a PhD also, because when you choose to put that word in the title, you also create the expectations to have 10 pages about anthropomorphism, which you don't.
No.
So if it's not essential, you probably want to replace it with something less like expectation heavy. Creating.
Yeah, this is funny because it's like it's bad expectation. No, I didn't deliver on talking about it. But
I think so. And the title is sorry, that didn't come out right.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I guess Andreas's point is just that the title is super, super important.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it essentially determines what you expect to get when opening the book. So those words need to be really carefully chosen.
Yeah.
And a humanoid specifically creates expectations in me, at least, to read a chapter about anthropomorphism in robotics.
Yes,
how it's problematic and how we can go beyond that.
That's true.
And you don't really have that.
No,
you don't really want that.
No, probably not.
Pick another word that's more neutral.
Yeah, I was thinking ambiguous.
Simple agentive machines or something neutral like that.
So we have a question from Michal.
Yeah. Hi, Joseph. Thanks for the nice presentation. And the question is like, with the emergence of drones for emergency situations, can mechanical sympathy be applied for interaction between drones and bystanders, especially if the bystanders are not technologically enthusiastic about them?
Yeah, yeah, we've had this discussion about emergency situations before. And so my first thought is that I don't think it's going to be helpful to, stop and reflect on what your body is doing in an emergency situation. However, having said that, it depends on how much the person already knows the machine. So in a ambulance drone coming in, get out of the way kind of situation, yeah, I don't think it's necessary. And there has been done work on police drones and stuff like that to communicate clearly to masses that X is happening, Y is happening. So I don't really see mechanical sympathy playing a role in that. However, I do have a obsession with flight investigation, crash investigation YouTube channels. And there are lots of times when a pilot ignores the flight checklist, and keep in mind, none of this is in the thesis. Pilot ignores the emergency flight checklist because they feel that the plane's doing something else, or they choose a different flap setting or whatever for the landing because they don't think the plane frame, the chassis can handle landing with the flap setting that the emergency checklist suggested. So yeah, it's really important. And I think I'm really interested to have this discussion with you as well later about like whether or not it has a place in something so procedural like flying a plane, where everything is like, the Swiss cheese model, and you got to make all of these objective reports before you do any change in the industry.
If I can just chip in.
Yeah.
The general argument, as far as I know, when we talk about automation in safety critical systems, is that you can very well apply these kinds of concepts, but you do it in training. So you do sandbox runs, you do simulator training, you do all kinds of training, because in the actual situation, there is clearly not room for reflection and growth and change and learning and aesthetic appreciation.
Yeah.
But you need to be as prepared as you can possibly be to deal with those situations where there is no time for any of the fancy stuff. And I'm not an expert, but I have colleagues working in air traffic control and pilot support. And my sense is these kinds of concepts could be super helpful for them to think a little more powerfully around what they do when they set up training regimes and stuff.
Cool.
So yeah. That's just what came to my mind when you asked that question, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Did we have other questions in the room? If not, Mafalda is wondering whether you have a question that you wish we would have asked.
Oh, the perfect closing of the seminar.
Not really. I think it was quite thorough. I'm very happy to see you all here. Nothing comes to mind. No.
Okay.
Yeah. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to think about that.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, then we close and thank our main actors for that wonderful performance.
Thank you.